Assuming we all have the same motion. Assuming feasibility, this house prefers a world where parents raise children without religion. Prime Minister, please.
It's behind the back of the teacher. Yes, Charlie. Is it being issued? Do I need to? Alright, that's fine. Right, sure. Okay. You can get it. It's okay. Let's just start this. That's my speech on my next word. That's my speech on my next word. First of all, panel, this is a preferred debate. What that implies is that the world starts afresh. What this most likely then means is that on both sides of the house, you cannot use narratives that exist in status quo without having to analyze how it would have happened in the alternative world. One, we think religion would still exist on both sides. You know why that is true? It's because of the reasons why religion even came up in the first place. Two structural analysis for this. One is that there are big questions like, where did mankind come from? Where did life start from? etc. We think insofar as humans don't have epistemic access to knowledge as to what started the Big Bang and the likes of that, there will always be these big questions. But two, the people still need things like a coping mechanism to help them through difficult parts of life. So we think religion will still exist on both sides of the house. We think the delta in this debate is the narrative and the way and the means by which it is proselytized, like concerning the people who are being proselytized to. Within the status quo, where religions are frequently focused on capturing children right from their formative years, the narrative that it tells these children is quite frankly extremely simplistic. Which is to say that there is a big God up there and a terrible guy down there. And if you do everything good, the good God loves you. And if you do terrible things, you go to hell where you burn in eternal fire. We think the way these particular things emanated was simply because of the fact that we're speaking to children. The very nature of the proselytization process in of itself was because they needed to antagonize these children and make them scared. We think this form of proselytization changes on our side of the world, and we'll prove why that leads to some better, like Delta in a particular regard. Let's frame out a couple of arguments. The debate is a preferred debate again. Again, the world starts afresh. An argument that, they could hear this particular narrative from places like schools, etc., does not work in this debate. You know why? One, because that is arguing against the motion. The motion says, assuming feasibility, these things will be done. So you cannot say they won't succeed at raising their children up without religion because schools will teach them religion anyway. That doesn't make any sense. Two, they will think parents control what children can do, where they go, and where they go to school. Relevance implies that they can take these children to non-religious schools if they even exist on the other side of the world. But finally, the self-sustaining incentive of schools means that they don't want their parents to take them out of those schools. There's every incentive to not do these terrible things in the first place. Those arguments won't work. Let's start for why we think the proselytization process is much better on our side of the world. One is that we think proselytization to an adult is done in ways in our side of the world which inheres to their self-interest. And why is this much better and what does this look like? Starting from the second question. We think it looks like teaching them things like love once they grow up. That religion fosters communal growth and love amongst people. Two, community and an ability to cope with the difficulties of life. But thirdly and most importantly, the gospel of success, which is to say that if you join us, a lot of things happen, great things happen, and all these things could benefit you at a particular point in time. This is true because the concept of hell and the concept of heaven are things that are fantastical to the grown mind. Why is this true? One is because it is perceived from a point of divorced reality. You've lived here for 18 years. They cannot now tell you that hell is there when you've never seen it before. You've never heard pictures of it before. It is frankly outlandish. It means that at that particular level of indoctrination, which scares people and tells people to consistently be scared of hell, is one that is lost in outside of the world. But secondly, it is that when you proselytize with negative narrative, it's extremely antagonistic. These people are less likely to engage this particular narrative because something that makes them feel bad. Insofar as humans have an incentive to present themselves, they don't have an incentive to expose themselves to this particular kind of narrative. Implication: proselytization is much more efficient in outside of the world. It's much more loving and it's much more better in a particular regard. Why then do we think this is principally justified? Notice, panel, that we think historically the greatest forms of things like injustice and oppression status quo are things that have been like meted out by religion in and of themselves. Why is this true? We think this looks like things like racism being proselytized in the Gospels, things like Gentiles and Jews and supremacy, etc. The Spanish Inquisition, where people literally use the gospel of Christianity to kill people. Wars, like numerous levels of wars in places all around the world. Things like suicide bombers, etc. The Dark Ages. These are all things that came from points of things like religion at that particular point in time. These people are people who are brainwashed ever since infancy, and this particular point in time. Once you take them out of these things, they don't have an incentive to put themselves on the line for a narrative that they most likely only engage in for self-sustenance and for protection of themselves. Yes.
Yeah, so like the thing is that children are the ones who are the most imaginative. They can think about Jack and the things of exercise and all these things. So in your world, you teach adults like
I think I've clarified it. If you didn't hear it, on my phone. Let's move on. So now let's move on, panel. Now we're going to run two last cases, which is on the principles, two principles here. Within panel, the greatest form of injustice in the history of mankind historically are meted out at children, right from the point of conception to the point of birth. Notice that your consent is not given when you are giving birth to. You don't consent to being born. You don't have control over how you live, where you are born, and how you die. What does this imply? Your agency has been eroded. But we think it is much, much worse in the upside of the world when these children at a particular point in time are fed a narrative which forces them to live their lives in specific ways. The reason why this is much different from anything else that your parents will tell you is because this thing transcends to the afterlife. It tells you to live your life in a particular way. It means that at the point when you break that narrative, which you've been forced to believe in, you are more likely to live in a state of constant depression and constant uncertainties. We think you plant children in a difficult position. We think that's a terrible, and that's a very, very bad thing. We think religion compounds these terrible actions. That's a bad thing. At the end of the debate, it's extremely simple. In a world where you don't tell children to believe in a certain narrative which causes them to be scared, which causes them to be in a consistent loop of uncertainty, you break a vast majority of the injustices that these children face in the vast majority of instances. Panel, at the end of the debate, there are three things you need to consider. One is that insofar as religion causes individuals to do terrible things, we significantly weaken the capacity of the religion to brainwash these children at the point in time of their infancy. Why? Because that infancy is where they are most vulnerable. They need to grow and make their own decisions for themselves.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that time. Leader of opposition,
Okay. 3, 2, 1. So when we're talking about the socialization of a child, the socialization of a child must come from a very rigid background. I'm going to explain why that should be very important in the course of my speech. First, secondly, we also need to consider the nature of parenting. Most times, parents would always want to enforce their ideology on their children. I think this would be symmetric in both worlds, right? But then what happens here is that how are we able to check that enforcement? Because if you're going to use religion or not, you're still going to want to enforce something on this particular child. The reason why I mentioned socialization of a child is very important, because that level of enforcement from this particular parent needs to be under check. Because this narrative about how I need to enforce on you because I've lived the world before you and have more experience than you is something that needs to be checked. It erodes the very existence of this particular children in terms of dignity and also in terms of that self-determination. So how does this look like? This looks like this. First, religion has rigid dogmas and rigid rules about what morality should look like and about what certain things should look like essentially. In a world where you teach children about this particular dogmas, about how you need to be moral in a certain way, essentially, two things. It checks the excessive mechanism of parents to always enforce on their children about certain things in terms of what should be interpreted about what morality should look like. Notice, morality is hugely subjective. So the extent to which you teach moral and the extent to what we see as good is heavily subjective. So if you want to raise a moral child, a moral upright child, you need to teach them the very basic of what can't shake, essentially, about the extent of how you need to be moral, as to how this is necessarily about the dogma about how to be moral, essentially. How does this check the excesses of enforcement? This is it. So even if a particular parent lies to you and say that you need to do something that is immoral, say for example, in the radical best case scenario, say, oh, go join a terrorist organization, essentially. Even if they are able to use religion to be able to justify that to you, the reason why religion is ideologically pure is because every dogma of religion goes against that level of extremism. And that's why in Islam, they're going to teach you that they are a religion of peace, essentially, more against Al-Qaeda and against ISIS. In Christianity, they're going to teach you about the extent to which you need to be upright, not hurt your neighbors, and those things, and how you need to relate with other kids around you. Notice, so even if your parent is recalcitrant and teaching you deviancy and teaching you to be able to fight and those things, the dogma checks that immediately. The comparison is worse. Because when you rely on very plain ideology exclusive of what religion should look like, what happens is that since morality in their world is usually very subjective, the extent to which you check parent dogma is so dependent on the parent's interpretation of what morality should look like. You're not really grooming a well-rounded socialized individual because you're grooming an individual from their world who is only a compendium of their parents' interpretation of the world. Meaning there are no external checking mechanisms that could check these things. In our world, the pastor could check the child, the imam could check the child. These are exclusive of how this particular parenting can look like. Because when you're raising a particular child with religion, essentially, guys, when you're raising a particular child, you introduce them to the church system. You introduce them to the religious community. So that they are a choir in church, for example. They are a worker in the mosque, for example. The extent to which these particularities also check what this particular parent teach them is how you raise particular people in a religious way. The comparison is just very worse. Because you are devoid of this level of community that is exerting from your side. The reason why this is true is this. Because first, the ideologies they need to present on their side can also go radical. So if I'm a racist, for example, the extent to which I teach my child about how they should be racist is something that is usually subjected to the fact that the child grows in the embodiment of the interpretation of what their parent sees the world to look like. It means that the extent of how that particular parent also belongs to the KK group, for example, or all racist community also accentuate the level upon which the particular child also grows in that validation. Their world is just worse off when it comes to socialization of a child. The next thing I'm going to say is this, why fear is very important and why the fear from religion is one that is good. The reason why fear is very important is because children are mischievous. Children are curious. Children are experimental. Children want fun, right? And these are things they would want to do even at the detriment of hurting other people. Why? Because the calculus of a child is one that prioritize more experimental benefits at the expense of hurting other people. So it means that you need to create a system where that particular child wouldn't easily be able to evade certain things. Why is religion better in this regard? Notice,